There was a thread about the hiring process that kind of blew up on Twitter last week, and for good reason. It was written by Sahil Bloom, who became popular on social media, specifically on Twitter, just in the last 12 months or so, because of his tips about the finance industry. This video is going to be a reaction to his 20 tips to stand out during the hiring process. I've read through some of these tips already, but not all of them, so a handful of the reactions you'll see in this video will be my first time seeing them. Most of them so far have all been very clearly good things to do to stand out in the hiring process, but a couple of them I'll raise some issue with and explain why. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and let's get into this one. He starts off by saying that the hiring process is ultra competitive. Typically that's true, and it certainly still is true amongst the top tier in the finance industry or in other industries in general, but it's not totally true as of June of 2021 given the current state of the labor market. He then says, but you've incorrectly been told that the only way to stand out is by having fancy degrees and credentials. I totally agree with him there. There are definitely great ways to stand out that don't involve top universities or credentials, and personally I would value someone being very educated or successful in their own right over them being educated or relatively successful to other people based on their university. Okay, number one, he says, do your research. Before an interview, spend a few hours researching the company and the position you're hiring for. At a minimum, learn the company mission, read up on recent news on the company, that's a big one, and study the backgrounds of its leaders. Google is a powerful asset, you need to use it. This tip was probably number one in his thread for a reason. I think it's the single best one that he gives. It is so true that if you read up on a company and really understand the position you're hiring for and what the company does, how it specifically operates, and especially if there's any relevant news surrounding the company or what it does, you're going to totally set yourself apart from all the other candidates applying to a certain position. Think about this from the hiring manager's perspective. They obviously know what their company does and what the positions within their company are and what position they're hiring for. So if you're speaking their language and in the conversation with them during the interview, you sound like someone else who may already hold one of the positions and you understand their goals and you understand the difficulties they face in achieving those goals, then they're already going to kind of see you in the light that they see their current employees. And if they can already picture you being an effective employee during the interview process, you totally set yourself apart from the rest of the candidates. Personally, for the role that I currently hold in wealth management, I basically use this very strategy about 24 hours leading up to the interview for my position. I read a news article about how the Department of Labor had recently announced that they were changing certain regulations that the wealth management industry needs to abide to. So during the interview, I asked the hiring managers about that. My question was really general. It was basically just like, how do you see this new regulation affecting you? Is it a pro or is it a con? But they were impressed that I asked that specific question, and I got a little bit lucky because just like an hour after my interview, one of their managing partners was going into another meeting to discuss how the firm was going to react to that very policy, so it was very top of mind and relevant for them. Asking that one question was certainly a part of what separated me from any other candidates for the position. The next tip is to embrace I don't know. You can't know the answer to every question, and you know what? That's okay. Very true. Don't be afraid to say I don't know, but then follow it with a plan to acquire that information. I don't know, but I'll dig in and follow up with you. This is a great tip, not just for the hiring process, but for life in general. It says so much about an individual when they answer a question with, I don't know. It shows that they're honest. It shows that they don't have a huge ego and they're able to admit when they're wrong. It shows that they have a willingness to learn. It shows that they're transparent. A lot of good things come from somebody saying, I don't know. Now, obviously, you don't want to say, I don't know to every question that gets asked of you. You want to know information about the position you're applying for and information about the industry. But when used honestly and effectively, saying, I don't know can be a really good tool to separate yourself from the pack. I'm especially a fan of saying I don't know, but then sort of reframing the question that was asked of you to something you are more familiar with, and then explaining how that answer can also apply to like a similar theme to the spirit of the question they may have asked you about, because then you'll get the benefits of being humble and saying I don't know, but also the advantages of being knowledgeable about a certain topic. Number three is to stop fearing rejection. He says, I'm not embarrassed to admit that I've been rejected for more jobs than I can count. It happens. You can't be a fit for everything and everyone. Stop being afraid of rejection. You miss 100% of shots you don't take. That doesn't apply for the interview process, but it's very applicable when applying for jobs. If you've seen any of my stuff about landing internships or landing jobs in the finance industry, you'll know that I recommend what could be described as a quantity over quality strategy. So especially for the top tier positions within an industry that are hyper competitive, you're just going to get no so many times. There's just going to be little factors that can differentiate other people that weren't you, that you should be applying to a lot of jobs, and that's going to involve a lot of rejection, and you need to be okay with that. You need to give yourself the most opportunities possible. Prepare for why us. Interviewers inevitably ask why us. Make sure you're prepared for it. Why do you like this company? The more specific, the better. Generic answers like, I love investing, get negative points. Well, I totally agree with him here, but I feel a little bit guilty about that because I remember when my friends and I were in college and university applying for full-time positions, we always joked about this question that interviewers always ask. And our sentiment was like, okay, do you want me to just lie and try to think of some fun fact about your company? Or do you want me to be honest and say that I'm applying to this job because I need a job and you pay a salary? So I think your ability to be selective and apply to positions that you really have great answers for the why us question really depends on the stage in your career, because early on you should be applying for a lot and you might not have the best answer to this all the time. But from an employer's perspective, and partly from my perspective now, having worked in the industry for about 5 years, I would love someone to have a really educated response on why us about our firm, how we fit within the competitive marketplace within the city that we work, what differentiates us from other firms. If someone knew the details on those types of things, if they had really done their market research, then that's totally going to set them apart from the rest of the candidates applying for a position. The next one sort of leads from the prior one, but he says to stalk. If you know who you'll be interviewing with, spend some time learning about their background. You can almost always do this on their company's website or just their LinkedIn. Identify potential bonding areas, like from their Facebook page, similar interests that you might have. This prior knowledge can help you connect more deeply, he says. This is so true. I always recommend people do this. It's just going to get you more educated on the person or people that you're interviewing with, and it might very much help you answer the why us, why do you want to work for this company question that will inevitably come. Number 6 is to seek warm intros. Warm intros and references are the holy grail of a competitive hiring process. Scan your networks for any connections to a company. Yes, LinkedIn is useful. I wouldn't say that's the holy grail. No, I don't agree with this one. It's certainly true that networking is extremely important and you definitely need to network well to find all the available opportunities out there. But if the hiring managers are good at their job and they're unbiased and they're actually uncovering what they need to about all the candidates interviewing for a position that could help show them which candidates will be best for the company, then hopefully the people they know or the referrals they come from shouldn't make all that much of a difference. I realize that's not always reality. Sometimes referrals make a big difference, but I just wouldn't call it the holy grail of the interview process. The next one's a little bit tricky, I think. It's a point about human interaction. So Hill says to blend deference and competence. Show deference to your interviewer, like defer to their thoughts and opinions, but not at the expense of your own confidence. The power dynamics of an interview are nuanced. Blending deference and confidence are how you manage them effectively and leave the interviewer with a positive impression. I certainly think that's true, but it's a really difficult tip to give people. He's not wrong here, but I don't think that trying to effectively manage the power dynamics of the conversation is all that useful of a thing for people to spend their time thinking about. Now, if you're someone who's great with communication and you feel like you have a handle on live interpretation of human psychology during conversation and all that, then go ahead. But honestly, most people aren't going to be great at managing this interpersonal power dynamic during an interview, so I don't think it's worth spending effort thinking about if you're not going to be able to do it all that effectively anyway. Worry about the things that you are going to make a difference in. Like the next tip, play to your strengths. Don't fight on an even playing field. If you have unique attributes, use them. Played in a team sport, talk about it, taught yourself to code, hype that up. Humility is great, but make sure that they know that you are special. This one is so important, and this is one that I personally struggle with pretty consistently. It's certainly possible to explain to people your achievements and your strengths without coming off as cocky. It's not necessarily easy to do that, but there are definitely people who do it all the time. You need to be careful about this because you don't want to sound like you're bragging, but it's even worse to spend a lot of time and energy throughout your life accumulating these accomplishments and then fail to even communicate to that person that you're talking to because you're worried about sounding cocky or something like that. My advice to be able to communicate accolades and accomplishments effectively without sounding like you're bragging is to listen to other people do it. There are a lot of interviews and podcasts where successful people talk about their successes in life. Pick out the ones that you think sound a little bit like you, sound like something that you could do naturally in a conversation, and also don't sound like the person is bragging or being arrogant. Then just mock the language and the communication style that they use to explain to someone why that they're a successful person. If you do this well in an interview, it'll certainly set you apart from the pack. Number one, because they will now know all the accomplishments and accolades you have, and number two, it'll show them that you're effective at communicating those. Next is show your passion. Showing a genuine passion and excitement for the company and role is the easiest way to stand out from the crowd. People want to hire candidates who want to be there. So smile and express your excitement calmly and let that passion shine through. I think this one kind of blends in with the one about knowing your answer to why this company. It doesn't strike me as all that important that a new candidate seems very passionate about the role. I think passion might be more of a personality trait than a predictor of future job success. So I don't know if this one's all that important in my mind. Number 10, carry a notebook. When you go in an interview, always bring a notebook. It's not just pageantry, use it. Yeah, this one's obvious. Always bring a notebook to an interview. Next, personalize your thank yous. After after an interview, send thank you notes to your interviewer. Definitely do this. Make them punchy so that the person actually reads it, and include a specific detail. I always did this. I think it's very beneficial. It's going to cost you 5 or 10 minutes and the price of a stamp, but if you do this well and make mention to like one conversation that came up between you and the interviewer, and there happen to be other candidates who were equally as qualified as you, but they don't send thank you notes, that thank you note could just be like the reminder that puts your name back at the front of the list in the interviewer's head. It could make the difference. The next one I think is probably the second most important tip in this whole list, and that is to ask unique questions. Most interviewers end with a classic, "Do you have any questions for me?" You better have some good questions. That's not him, that's me saying that. He says, this isn't just a throwaway question. It's an opportunity to show off your differentiated initiative and hustle. Ask a unique question grounded in your diligence on the company. This is super important. It'll go hand in hand with the research you do on this company in the week or day prior to your interview. And it shows a couple things. Number one is that you know a good amount of information about the company and the position that you're hiring for, but also number two, that you want to learn more about those things. Number three, that you're someone who is willing to learn new things. Honestly, this has always been my number one interview tip that I've given to friends is write down 4 or 5 really good questions about the firm and role that you're going into. These questions should not be logistics things like hours or vacation days or pay or anything like that, but things about how the dynamic works with that position, with that company, with the industry, things like that. Next, he titles real weaknesses. Getting asked about your weaknesses feels like a trap, so we tend to give them that are kind of strengths, like I'm too detail oriented. Yeah, that stuff is stupid. Don't do that. I once told an interviewer I don't know accounting, but that I would learn it. I don't think it's all that important to show a real weakness for this question. I definitely agree with him that I hate when people are like, oh, I'm too detail oriented or I'm a perfectionist, whatever. That just sounds stupid. But if someone's not opening up to you about some emotional trauma that they've had in their past and how it applies to their professional career now, that's fine. I don't think they have to reveal any true deep weaknesses in an interview. Next, he says, focus on the long term. The interviewer may ask about your plans for the next few years. This could be a trap to catch short-term thinkers. Simply reframe it and focus on the long term. Companies want long-term thinkers. He could be right here, but I know nothing about people wanting long-term thinkers and trying to trap interviewers with short-term oriented questions. If I was asked a question about something that I'd like to accomplish over the next 2 to 3 years, I'm going to talk about the next 2 to 3 years. In my opinion, it would be really stupid for an interviewer to try to trap me with that by seeing if I'm going to answer a long-term oriented question. Actually, if I asked someone this question and they reframed it and answered in something that would be more relevant to like a 10 to 20 year time frame, I would think that'd be a negative point because they didn't actually answer the question I asked them. So his tip here doesn't make much sense to me. Highlight learning as a goal. When asked about your goals for the coming years, always highlight learning. This certainly wouldn't hurt. And if you're someone who loves education, then go ahead and talk about this. But I also don't think people who don't love education, like myself, for example, should talk about loving education. You're going to come off as phony because they're going to be able to tell that you're lying. I'm more of a fan of like progression and results than learning more stuff. So maybe that's a weak point and certain interviewers might perceive that negatively, but that's just who I am. So in an interview, I would rather kind of give off that mentality rather than acting like I'm really interested on improving education in the future when that might not be a real passion of mine. Next, he says, nail the cover letter. A punchy, well-written cover letter is one of the best ways to stand out. That's true. I do think the resume is more important than the cover letter, but having a good cover letter that specifically does a lot of the things I've talked about earlier, like illustrates how much you know about the company and the specific role you're hiring for and how they operate within the industry, all those things are going to help your cover letter stand out. Make them look smart. In large organizations, hierarchies matter. If interviewing at one, a large organization, be clear about how you'll fit in and help it thrive. When speaking with your future managers, you want them to believe that you'll make them look smart to their bosses if they hire you. Yeah, I think this is super valuable. Making them look smart and feel smart is super important. I would also just add on to this complimenting them in the interview because it's going to make them feel better about this. Now, nothing really cheesy. It has to fit in well to the conversation, but if you can do it effectively, it can really help you stand out. So Sahil's point here is like, if they have a certain issue that they need to perform well on for their upper level managers, if you can present yourself as a solution to that issue and they know that they are in turn going to look better, their team's going to look better, then they have no reason not to hire you like on the spot. Next is pass the plane test. I don't know what this is. There's a common and dated test in the hiring process. Would I want to sit next to this person on a plane for 5 hours? This was about being normal, but normalcy is overrated. Be yourself, but be sure to get across that you are kind and genuine. I don't really understand what Sahil is saying here. It sounds like he might be saying just communicate to them that you're not normal and that you're genuine, but both of those things are not mutually exclusive, so I don't understand this. I'm going to skip over it for now. Targeted outreach. Before applying to a company, try to interact with 1 or 2 of its employees. Reach out to a few people in similar roles and ask about what they'd be willing to share. If you do this and they actually respond to you and tell you about some of the things they do on a day-to-day basis, some of their goals, some of their struggles, then you're going to be far more prepared for those important, like, why this company, how can you help us, interview questions. I think this is a great tip. It's just not one that you're going to be able to utilize all that often because most of the time employees aren't going to respond to random LinkedIn messages that say, hey, tell me about your job. And number 20, last one on the list here, is to prove your readiness. Hiring managers want to know you can do the job or learn quickly to do it. If possible, cite examples of how you've done the requirements of this job in the past. If not possible, cite examples of times you have quickly learned something new. You know, there are a lot of positive personal attributes that would be beneficial to your chances of getting a job. I don't know that I would call this one like one of the top 20 most critical ways to set yourself apart from other candidates, because especially if it's one of those hyper-competitive positions that we talked about, every candidate applying for it, or at least seriously being considered for it, is going to be able to communicate how they are an effective learner or how they can learn things quickly. So just doing that, I don't think will differentiate you from the pack. It's a good thing to do, but not super important. If you've gotten to this point in the video, it means you watched the whole thing, and you know that I very much appreciate that. The YouTube algorithm loves the long watch times in terms of total minutes watched or just percentage of this video. If you could also like and subscribe if you haven't done either of those things yet already, I very much appreciate them. And as always, thanks for watching.